there, welcome to Ivory Tower Collections. So you just purchased the UAV mount board for use in the Atari 7800 NTSC console. Awesome, thank you for that. This is a board I designed about a year ago, and its purpose is to give a good, stable, and fairly easy way to install the UAV into an NTSC 7800. A couple of things I want to talk about with this board really quick. You'll notice that there is a set of header pins on both the bottom side of the board, and there's also some thinner, smaller pins on top. I'll explain what those are for. Now, the pins that are on the bottom are labeled, and these actually correlate and are labeled to match the same via connections that the UAV ends up getting connected to as well. So this is for both reference as well as to help troubleshoot connectivity issues if you should have any in the process. There is also another set of pins on the backside corner here, and these actually match up to the audio resistors that we get our audio from. About the board itself, we have a section here with some additional IC logic. This is actually an additional circuit that helps with color adjustment with 7800 games. It's called the chroma timing fix. Over here we have a couple of other components, and these basically replicate the original mixing circuit that Atari uses in the 7800 to combine the TIA and the external audio, which was mainly used for pokey games, together, and then also to provide you with a nice, easy to access audio output pad right here that you can solder wiring from to your RCA jacks or whatever you wish to use. There's also two other vias over here off to the side for 5 volts and ground. Now, you don't have to use these vias if you don't want to, but the idea is that you could go ahead and solder some wiring to these points here and then attach them to other parts on the 7800 main board. That's something else you would need to do prior to installing this board because, again, once you have everything in place, these are going to be very difficult to get to. If, however, you don't want to bother with this, you don't really have to, because the UAV and the way that it's designed, you can still use the 5 volt and ground pads on the UAV itself to provide the power and ground you need for everything in the setup. So either way can be used and will work. So what are some considerations prior to installing the board? Well, I'd already mentioned the 5 volt and ground, but I would also advise on the UAV to also go ahead and solder in your output wiring, or perhaps if you're going to, you could use some pin headers, similar to something like that, for quick, easy disconnects of your wiring for serviceability. Which, by the way, the UAV is designed so that once the mount board's in place, the UAV just sits directly on top of the pins, which will actually fit through the same points needed here on the UAV. But once this is all installed in place where it goes, it actually becomes much more difficult to access the output pins or the output vias for wiring afterwards. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about the actual install process for the UAV and the mount board combo set. I have here a fairly typical 7800 NTSC board. This one's a later revision, but it doesn't matter because luckily for us, in the case of the UAV and the video signals that we need, every revision of the NTSC 7800 mainboard is the same in this area here, which is where we need to focus on. So the way that this is designed is, in the past, when you would install a UAV, there's different points off the center vias of the UAV that you would have to solder to the base of some of these resistor legs here. And you can certainly still do that. Again, this mount board is not required. Well, with the mount board, what you do is essentially the same thing. And that is that you just have to set up the mount board close to the resistor pin legs and solder it into place. This provides two things. It provides us with all the signals we need for the UAV to work, but the other thing it does is it provides a nice solid anchor for the UAV to sit in, and it's in a nice compact area that doesn't infringe on anything else that you might possibly want to service or work on in the future. It can be kind of tricky to solder some of these header pins to the resistor legs, and there are a couple of ways to help you out with that. For starters, it's pretty much imperative that you get some alcohol and you clean the base of the resistors. That's because on almost every 7800 I've seen, these resistor legs tend to be pretty gummy and pretty cruddy with a lot of leftover flux residue. Now, specifically the resistors that we are concerned with are going to be the first 4 resistors at the bottom here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. This one ends up getting skipped, but that's automatically accounted for in the UAV's mount board design, and then the next 3 thereafter. And then the other 2 points that we're concerned with relate to the audio specifically, and it's going to be the base of these 2 resistors here next to the audio adjustment coil. Now these are going to be the most tricky to solder to because with the UAV mount board in place, they're somewhat obscured and it can be difficult, but with a careful, steady hand, it's absolutely possible. Now for a more slightly advanced and cleaner install, one of the other reasons for the 5-volt and ground vias that I created over here are located where they are is because they actually line up with the same 5-volt and ground headers that feed the RF modulator. With another set of right-angled header pins, you can actually solder the short ends of those pins to the tops of the other pins off the RF modulator to provide you with your ground and 5-volt source. So another thing you can do that will help you to install the UAV mount board a little easier is to go ahead and apply just a tiny bit of solder to pre-tin some of the header pins. And now that takes us to the main event, which is of course to get the UAV's mount board soldered into place on the 7800. So with one pin essentially tacked down into place, I'm going to apply some fresh flux to help with the solder connections. And once you have a few pins started, then you just kind of work your way down. And once you have it done, you should have something that looks similar to this. Again, soldering on the 2 audio connections on the back side of the UAV mount board can be a little bit tricky. But the easiest way I've found to do this is to actually approach your soldering iron from the other side. Now I'm going to be obscuring this while I do this, and I do apologize. But the basic idea is that you take your solder and you feed it through from underneath just where the pins are. And it sometimes helps to go ahead and have a tiny bit of solder on the end of the soldering iron just to help with this. And once you're completed, it should look something similar to this. As you can see, I've got just little beads of solder connecting from those header pin legs of the mount board to the bases of the resistors. And there is your completed installed mount board. So at this point in time, it would be advisable to go ahead and clean up any leftover residue flux. Again, you want to be careful when you're cleaning off the board and when you're doing all of this that you do not bend any of these pins on the top of the board. There's the mount board installed and ready to go. And again, as one last test, you might go ahead and take the UAV and just make sure that it does sit in place still on top of the alignment pins. So what you can actually do at this point, before you solder down the UAV into place with the 7800 essentially with power applied and with your outputs connected up to your display, you can actually hold down the UAV by hand to at least test it and make sure you're getting some video output. Now I will state that because of variances in the way that the vias might be set up or the way that the pins are aligned and touching, that there could be some color flickering, things like that that take place while you're testing it, but at least you know that the UAV itself is functioning before you solder everything down into place. Once you've verified that everything looks like it's connected up, at that point you're ready to go ahead and solder the UAV directly to the top of the mount board. And there we are with the completed setup. The only thing, aside from running your output wiring, is also that, remember, there is an audio output pad located right here. So for your audio output, you would just need to solder on a wire to the end of that pad and run that out wherever you need to as well. Now there isn't a dedicated ground for the audio off of this UAV mount board, but you can attach your ground for the audio pretty much anywhere you want. So as a last final check, one thing you might want to do is to verify all of your connectivity between the UAV back to various points on the board that we can check. You can also check these points prior to installing the UAV, which I would advise. So as an example, if you want to check the pin connection for S, which you can check either at the UAV mount board or on the UAV itself once you have it installed, is you can just put one probe to the S pin, and then the other one will go to pin 3 on the 7423 chip right here. Similar to that, you can also probe pin 1 on the UAV or pin 1 on the UAV mount board, and that will go to pin 11 on the 7432. The other points can actually be checked from actual unused vias on the main board. If you want to check connection pins 2 and 3 right here, they can be found right in this location. There's pin 2, and then pin 3 is right next to it. And then in addition to that, we have connection 0 for loom 0. That actually can be found near the Maria chip right here. And then you can also check your presence for 5 volt and ground. Well, here's the 5 volt pin here, and the 5 volt main rail is actually right over here. Same thing with ground, which is located up here, and you can just check any of the points on the board for ground. Here I'm checking one side of the RF shield section. You can also check the ground trace here that runs down the center of the board. The TIA color input line right here can be checked and found right here at this point. So really the only connection that's going to be difficult is going to be the Maria's color input line, and that's because with the extra timing circuit in place, it doesn't make a direct connection. But you can check it at the UAV mount board itself by holding the pin to that connection on the mount board, and then the point for that is real close to where loom 0 was over by the Maria chip right here. And really that's pretty much it as far as the connections go. So yeah, just a real quick, easy way to verify your connectivity with the UAV or from the mount board to a couple of points on the main board. So hopefully that helps you out in knowing how to install the Ivory Tower Collections UAV mount board into place, but it does provide a nice, compact, and solid install for the UAV in an NTSC 7800.